The stars had belonged to the galactic hegemony for 12,000 years, and in all that time, the 6 elder species had never known true defeat. They had built empires across 1,000,000 worlds, conquered threats that younger races could not even imagine, and they believed with absolute certainty that they were the masters of the universe. When humanity first reached the stars, the hegemony looked upon them with something between amusement and pity. These small creatures from a small blue world had only just learned to travel between planets, and their technology was crude compared to the wonders the elder species had created. The council debated for 3 standard years before finally granting humans provisional membership in the Alliance, a status that meant little more than permission to exist. Commander Yael Okonkwo stood on the bridge of the Earth ship Defiant and watched the massive alien vessels drift past her viewport. Each one was larger than anything humanity had ever built, their hulls gleaming with metals that human scientists could not even name. She had served in the United Earth Auxiliary Fleet for 15 years, and in all that time, she had never been allowed to do anything that truly mattered. Her orders were always the same: stay in the rear, handle logistics, transport supplies, collect the wounded, and salvage the wreckage after the real warriors had finished their battles. It was important work, she knew that, but it burned inside her like a fire that would not die. Her soldiers were trained and ready and eager to prove themselves, yet the hegemony refused to see them as anything more than clever animals. Commander, said Lieutenant Marcus Chen, her second in command, as he stepped onto the bridge, we have received new orders from Hegemony Command. Okonkwo turned to face him, and she could already see the frustration in his eyes. Let me guess, she said. They want us to stay behind the battle lines and wait for the scraps. Chen nodded slowly. The Crystalline Admiral has requested that we handle medical evacuation for the wounded after the engagement at Sector 7. He says our ships are well suited for transport duty. The words hit Okonkwo like a punch to the stomach. Another battle, another chance for glory and honor, and humanity would once again be left to watch from the sidelines. She had requested combat assignments 17 times in the past 3 years, and 17 times she had been denied. Schedule a meeting with Admiral Voroth Sel, she said, her voice tight with controlled anger. I want to speak with him directly. The meeting took place aboard the Hegemony flagship, a vessel so vast that the Defiant could have fit inside its smallest cargo bay. Okonkwo walked through corridors made of living crystal, past alien crew members who looked at her with expressions she could not read. Some seemed curious, others seemed disgusted, and a few seemed to not notice her. Admiral Voroth Sel waited for her in the command chamber, his body a towering structure of transparent crystal that pulsed with inner light. He was ancient by any standard, having commanded fleets for longer than humanity had possessed written language. When he spoke, his voice resonated through the chamber like music made of glass. Commander Okonkwo, he said, and there was no warmth in his tone. I understand you wish to discuss your assignment. I do, Admiral, she replied, standing straight and refusing to be intimidated by his size or his power. My soldiers are ready for combat duty. We have trained for years, we know your tactics, and we are eager to prove our worth to the Hegemony. Voroth Sel's crystalline form flickered with colors that Okonkwo had learned to recognize as condescension. Your eagerness is noted, he said, but eagerness is not enough. War is not a place for enthusiasm or emotion. It is precision, it is mathematics, it is the careful execution of proven strategies that have succeeded for millennia. We can learn those strategies, Okonkwo insisted. Give us a chance. Your kind lacks the discipline, Voroth Sel replied, and his tone made it clear that he considered this a simple fact rather than an insult. Humans are governed by feelings. You react instead of planning. You improvise instead of following doctrine. These traits may serve you well in your primitive conflicts, but they have no place in a hegemony battle fleet. Okonkwo felt the anger rising inside her, but she forced herself to remain calm. With respect, Admiral, you have never seen humans fight. You have never given us the opportunity to show you what we can do, and I do not intend to, Voroth Sel said. The Vorax swarm is the greatest threat this galaxy has faced in 10,000 years. We cannot afford to experiment with unproven species during a war of this magnitude. Your people will serve where they are needed, and where they are needed is in support roles. There was nothing more to say. Okonkwo knew that arguing further would only make things worse. She bowed her head slightly, the gesture of respect that hegemony protocol demanded, and she turned to leave. Commander Vorithsel called after her, and she paused at the doorway. "Do not mistake my caution for cruelty. I am trying to protect your people. The front lines are no place for a species that has not yet learned to control its emotions." Okonkwo did not turn around. "Perhaps, Admiral," she said quietly. "Our emotions are not the weakness you believe them to be." She walked back to her ship in silence, and she did not speak to anyone until she was alone in her quarters. There she sat in the darkness, and she thought about her soldiers, about the men and women who had left Earth to serve among the stars, who had trained and sacrificed and dreamed of making humanity proud. They deserved better than this, and she swore to herself that one day, somehow, she would give them the chance. They deserved. First 3 battles against the Vorax went exactly as the hegemony had predicted. Their fleets moved in perfect formation, executing strategies that had been refined over centuries. The Vorax were pushed back, their bioships destroyed by the thousands, and the elder species congratulated themselves on another successful campaign. But the Vorax were not like other enemies. They learned, they adapted, and they waited. And when the 4th battle came, everything changed. Okonkwo watched the reports coming from the safety of the rear lines, and she felt a chill run down her spine as the numbers told a story of disaster. The hegemony's 7th Fleet, the pride of their military, was being torn apart. The Vorax had anticipated every maneuver, countered every tactic, as if they had read the ancient playbooks themselves. By the time the battle ended, the 7th Fleet no longer existed. 17 hours of combat had reduced it to scattered debris and dying screams, and for the first time in 12,000 years, the masters of the galaxy knew what it meant to be afraid. The news of the 7th Fleet spread through the hegemony like a disease, infecting every world and every species with a terror they had never known before. For 12,000 years, they had believed themselves invincible, and now that belief lay shattered among the wreckage of their greatest warships. Commander Okonkwo read the casualty reports in her quarters, and each number felt like a weight pressing down on her chest. The 7th Fleet had been crewed by beings from all 6 elder species, warriors who had trained their entire lives for battle, and they had been destroyed in less than a single day. Whatever the Vorax were, they had become something far more dangerous than anyone had expected. The council is called an emergency assembly, Lieutenant Chen announced as he entered her quarters. His face was pale and his hands were shaking slightly. "Every commander in the sector has been ordered to attend." Okonkwo stood and straightened her uniform. "Even the auxiliary forces?" Shiaskedchin nodded. "Even us. Whatever is happening, it must be serious enough that they need everyone." The assembly chamber was the largest space Okonkwo had ever seen, a vast dome of crystal and light that could hold representatives from 1,000 worlds. She stood with her human officers in a small section near the back, surrounded by aliens who towered over them and looked down with expressions of worry and fear. The mood in the chamber was unlike anything she had experienced before, and she realized that this was what panic looked like among beings who had never learned to feel. Counselor Meridax, a being of flowing silver energy, rose to address the assembly. Her voice echoed through the chamber like thunder rolling across an empty sky 3 days ago. "The Vorax swarm attacked Calixar Prime," she began, and the chamber fell into absolute silence. "Our defense fleet was overwhelmed in 17 hours. The colony fell 6 hours after that. 2 billion citizens of the hegemony are dead, and 3 more worlds have gone silent since then." A wave of shocked murmurs swept through the assembly. Calixar Prime had been one of the most heavily defended worlds in the sector, protected by weapons and shields that were supposed to be unbreakable. "We have analyzed the battle data," Meridax continued, "and we have reached a troubling conclusion. The Vorax have learned our tactics. They have studied our formations, our strategies, our doctrines. They know how we fight, and they have developed counters for everything we do." Okonkwo felt a cold understanding settle into her mind. The hegemony had been using the same strategies for thousands of years, refining them and perfecting them until they believed nothing could defeat them. But that very perfection had become their weakness. They were predictable, and the Vorax had figured out how to exploit that predictability We are open to suggestions," Meridax said, and the desperation in her voice was unmistakable. "Any commander who has ideas for new tactics should speak now." The chamber remained silent. The elder species had spent so long following their ancient doctrines that they had forgotten how to think in any other way. They looked at each other with confusion and fear, and no one stepped forward. Aquo raised her hand. Every eye in the chamber turned toward her, and she could feel the weight of their attention like a physical force. The human section was so small that many of the assembled commanders had not even noticed them before, and now they stared with a mixture of surprise and disdain. "The human speaks," said a Silurian admiral, his feathered crest rising with indignation. "What could her kind possibly know about war at this level?" "Let her speak," said a voice that Okonkwo recognized. Admiral Vorothsel moved through the crowd, his crystalline form dimmer than she had ever seen it. He looked tired in a way that she had not thought possible for his kind. "We have exhausted our own ideas. Perhaps it is time to listen to new ones." The chamber quieted, and Okonkwo stepped forward. Her heart was pounding in her chest, but she kept her voice steady and calm. "The Vorax have learned your patterns," she said, "because your patterns never change. You fight the same way every time, and that makes you easy to predict. But humans do not fight that way." "How do humans fight?" Meridax asked. "We improvise," Okonkwo replied. "We adapt. We change our tactics based on what we see in front of us, not based on what worked 1,000 years ago. We make mistakes, yes, but we also make decisions that no one expects, not even ourselves." Sometimes a ripple of skeptical murmurs ran through the chamber, but Vorothsel raised a hand to silence them. "You are suggesting that chaos is a strategy?" he asked. "Not chaos," Okonkwo said. "Flexibility. The Vorax cannot predict what has no pattern. They cannot counter tactics that have never been used before. If you wanted to win this war, you need to stop fighting like machines and start fighting like beings who can think and feel and react." The chamber was silent for a long moment, and Okonkwo could see the elder species struggling with what she had said. For them, emotion and improvisation were weaknesses to be eliminated, not strengths to be embraced. Asking them to change their entire way of thinking was like asking them to become different creatures. Entirely. Vorothsel spoke again. "There is a station at the edge of our territory," he said slowly, as if each word cost him something precious. "Therikos Station. It guards the approach to the inner colonies. If it falls, the Vorax will have a clear path to our core worlds. You want us to defend it?" Okonkwo said. Vorothsel's form flickered with colors she had never seen before, and she realized that this was what shame looked like in his species. "I am asking you to hold the line," he said. "I am asking you to do what we cannot. I am asking you to fight in a way that the Vorax have never seen." Okonkwo looked at her officers, at the humans who had been dismissed and ignored and told they were not good enough. She saw the fire in their eyes, the hunger to prove themselves, and she knew what her answer had to be. "Give us the station," she said. "We will hold it. The Vorax fleet will arrive in 4 days, Vorothsel warned. "You will be outnumbered, outgunned, and far from any reinforcement. This may be a mission from which you do not return." Okonkwo smiled, and there was something fierce in that smile, something that made even the ancient admiral take notice. "Then we will make sure our deaths mean something," she said. "But I promise you this, Admiral. That station will not fall while a single human still breathes." She turned and walked out of the chamber, and her officers followed her. Behind them, the elder species watched in silence, and for the first time in their long lives, they wondered if perhaps they had been wrong about these strange little creatures. From the small blue world, perhaps the humans were not as weak as they had believed. Perhaps they were about to find out. Therikos Station hung in the darkness of space like a wounded animal waiting to die. Its shields were failing, its weapons were damaged, and its garrison had lost half their number in the last Vorax attack. When the Earth Auxiliary Fleet arrived, the survivors looked at the small human ships with eyes full of despair. "These are our reinforcements?" asked a Silurian officer, his feathered crest flat against his skull in a display of hopelessness. "A handful of transport ships and medical vessels?" "We are already dead." Commander Okonkwo stepped off her shuttle and onto the station deck. She looked at the alien survivors, at their broken spirits and their defeated postures, and she felt something rise inside her chest. It was not pity, it was not anger. It was determination. Pure and fierce and burning like a star, I am Commander Yaelo Okonkwo of the United Earth Auxiliary Fleet, she announced, her voice cutting through the gloom like a blade. As of this moment, this station is under my command. Anyone who wants to survive the next 4 days will follow my orders without question. The Silurian officer stepped forward, his crest rising slightly. You cannot simply take command, he protested. Protocol requires. Protocol got your fleet destroyed, Okonkwo interrupted. Protocol is why the Vorax know exactly how you will fight before you even begin fighting. Protocol ends now. She turned to Lieutenant Chen, who had already begun directing human engineers toward the station's damaged systems. I want a full inventory of every weapon, every ship, and every piece of equipment on this station within 2 hours. If it can explode, I want to know about it. If it can move, I want to know how fast. The next 4 days were unlike anything the alien survivors had ever experienced. Okonkwo tore apart everything they knew about warfare and rebuilt it into something strange and terrifying, and Noosh split her small fleet into 17 separate squadrons, each one operating independently with no fixed formation. She armed cargo freighters with mining explosives and painted them to look like warships. She positioned decoy satellites throughout the sector, each one broadcasting signals that made it appear to be a capital ship. She ordered her engineers to build makeshift weapons from salvaged parts, creating devices that had never existed in any military handbook. This is madness, the Silurian officer said as he watched human soldiers welding metal plates onto medical shuttles. There is no cohesion, no geometric integrity. Your formations violate every principle of established space warfare. That is exactly the point, replied Lieutenant Chen with a grin that showed too many teeth. The Vorax have learned to predict formations. They have never learned to predict us. On the 3rd day, Okonkwo gathered every being on the station for a final briefing. Humans stood beside aliens, all of them watching the human commander with a mixture of fear and fascination. The Vorax will arrive tomorrow, she said. They will expect us to defend this station the same way every hegemony force has defended every station for the past 10,000 years. They will be wrong. She pulled up a display showing her battle plan, and even the humans looked confused by what they saw. There was no center, no flanks, no clear line of defense. Instead, there were scattered clusters of ships positioned in seemingly random locations throughout the surrounding space. We are going to hit them from every direction at once, Okonkwo explained. We are going to change our positions constantly. We are going to do things that make no tactical sense. We are going to be so unpredictable that their hive mind will not be able to process what we are doing. And if that does not work, asked a crystalline engineer, his form flickering with anxiety. Okonkwo smiled. Then we will improvise. The Vorax arrived at dawn of the 4th day, a churning mass of bioships and drones that blotted out the stars. There were hundreds of them, perhaps thousands, and they moved with the terrible precision that had destroyed the 7th Fleet. They executed their opening maneuver perfectly, a flanking pattern designed to encircle a traditional defensive formation. But there was no formation to encircle. Instead, they found empty space where their calculations told them enemies should be before they could adjust. Okonkwo gave the order. All squadrons, attack 17 groups of ships struck from 17 different angles. Human pilots flew directly into the Vorax swarm, weaving between bioships and firing at point-blank range. Decoy freighters exploded in the heart of enemy formations, scattering debris and confusion. Small fighters darted in and out of the chaos, targeting command nodes and communication clusters. The Vorax tried to adapt, tried to find the pattern in the human tactics, but there was no pattern to find. Every time they predicted where a squadron would move, it moved somewhere else. Every time they prepared a counterattack, the humans did something completely different in the station itself. Ground teams fought to repel Vorax boarding parties. Human soldiers used every tool available to them, from standard weapons to improvised explosives to fire extinguishers sprayed directly into alien sensory organs. They played heavy music through the station speakers, flooding Vorax communication frequencies with noise that disrupted their coordination. Lieutenant Chen led a desperate countercharge against a group of Vorax that had breached the main hangar. He was wounded 3 times but refused to fall. rallying his soldiers with shouts and curses that the translator systems could barely process. "Come on, you ugly bugs," he screamed, firing his weapon until it overheated and then throwing it at the nearest enemy. "Is that all you have? My grandmother hits harder than that." The battle raged for 18 hours, and it was not elegant. It was not precise. It was bloody and chaotic and furious. Human ships were destroyed, human soldiers died, and yet they kept fighting with a ferocity that the Vorax had never encountered. As the 19th hour began, something changed. The Vorax swarm hesitated, their movements becoming uncertain and confused. Their hive mind had been processing the battle data, trying to find a pattern, trying to predict what the humans would do next, and it had failed. For the first time in their existence, they faced an enemy they could not understand, and then, for the first time in the war, the Vorax Retriata Conquo stood on the bridge of the Defiant, her uniform torn and her face covered in blood that was not entirely her own. She watched the enemy flee into the darkness of space, and she allowed herself one moment of exhausted triumph. "Commander," Chen's voice came through the communicator, weak but alive. "Did we just win?" Okonkwo looked at the wreckage floating around them, at the bodies of friends and enemies alike, at the battered station that still somehow stood against the stars. "Yes," she said quietly. "We won." Behind her, a Silurian officer who had doubted her just 4 days ago bowed his feathered head in respect. "I was wrong about your species," he said. "You are not primitives. You are wolves." Okonkwo turned to face him, and despite her exhaustion, she managed a small smile. "Remember that," she said, "and tell your people, the wolves are here now, and we are not going anywhere." Victory had a price, and Commander Okonkwo paid it with every step she took through the medical bays of Theracos Station. The wounded lay in rows that seemed to stretch forever, humans and aliens side by side, their bodies broken, but their spirits somehow still intact. She stopped at every bed, spoke to every patient, learned every name, because that was what a commander did when her people bled for her. "Sergeant Williams," she said, kneeling beside a young woman whose left arm was wrapped in regeneration bandages. "How are you feeling?" Williams managed a weak smile. "Still alive, Commander. That's more than I expected when those bugs started climbing through the hull." "You held the eastern corridor for 6 hours," Okonkwo said. "Your actions saved 100 lives. I have submitted your name for commendation." "Thank you, Mum," Williams replied, and there were tears forming in her eyes. "But the commendation should go to Private Torres. He was the one who figured out that the fire suppression foam could blind them. He didn't make it, but his idea saved us all." Okonkwo nodded and made a note in her datapad. Torres would receive his commendation posthumously. It was not enough. It would never be enough. But it was all she could give him now. The final count was brutal. 37% of the human forces had been killed or wounded at Theracos. That meant more than 400 of her soldiers would never go home, would never see their families again, would never grow old on the world that had sent them to the stars. Okonkwo felt the weight of each loss like a stone in her chest, and she knew she would carry that weight for the rest of her life. Admiral Vorothsel arrived at the station 3 days after the battle. His crystalline form moved through the corridors slowly, taking in the damage, the makeshift repairs, the exhausted defenders who had somehow achieved the impossible. When he found Okonkwo in the medical bay, he stood in silence for a long moment before speaking. "You mourn each one," he said, and there was something like wonder in his voice. "Every soldier who fell. You feel their loss personally." Okonkwo looked up at him with eyes that were red from lack of sleep and unshed tears. "Of course I do," she said. "They trusted me with their lives. They followed my orders into battle. How could I not mourn them?" Vorothsel's form flickered with colors she did not recognize. "In the hegemony, we calculate acceptable casualties before each engagement. We determine what percentage of losses are strategically viable. We do not feel them as you do, and that is why you could not beat the Vorax," Okonkwo replied. "You fight with your minds, with your calculations and your percentages. We fight with our hearts. Every death matters to us. Every sacrifice has meaning. And that is why we fight harder than you ever could." The Admiral was silent for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer than she had ever heard it. "I believe I understand now," he said. "Your emotions are not a weakness. They are your strength. They drive you to do things that logic would never permit. That is exactly right, Okonkwo said. When one of us falls, the rest fight harder to make sure that death was not wasted. We do not accept losses. We avenge them. Word of the victory at Therakos spread through the hegemony faster than any message had ever traveled before. For the first time in the war, someone had driven back the Vorax, and that someone was not one of the elder species. It was the humans, the primitives, the clever animals who were supposed to stay in the rear and handle the scraps in 1,000 worlds. Beings who had never thought twice about humanity began to pay attention. They studied the battle records, analyzed the tactics, and tried to understand how such a small force had accomplished what the greatest fleets could not. And what they found surprised them. They saw soldiers who charged into certain death because their friends were in danger. They saw commanders who wept for the fallen and then rose to fight again. They saw a species that fought not just with weapons and strategy, but with passion and fury, and an absolute refusal to surrender. The crystalline academies began teaching human tactics. The Silurian councils debated whether emotion might be useful after all. The other elder species watched with growing respect as these strange little creatures, from the edge of known space, proved themselves worthy of standing among the stars. But the Vorax were watching too deep. In the dark spaces between galaxies, the hive mind processed the data from Therakos. It analyzed every human tactic, every unexpected maneuver, every moment of chaos that had confused its calculations, and it reached a conclusion that changed the course of the war. Other species were predictable. They could be defeated, but the humans were different. The humans were dangerous. The humans had to be destroyed before they could spread their chaos to the rest of the galaxy. The hive mind made its decision. For the first time in its existence, it targeted a specific species for total elimination. It gathered its forces, billions of bioships and drones and warrior forms, and it turned them toward a small blue world on the edge of hegemony. Space. It was coming for Earth. Okonkwo received the intelligence report on a cold morning. In the station commander's office, she read it 3 times, hoping she had misunderstood, but the words did not change. The largest Vorax fleet ever assembled was heading directly for humanity's homeworld. They had 3 weeks before it arrived. They are scared of us, Chen said quietly, reading over her shoulder. We hurt them badly enough that they decided we have to die. That is one way to look at it, Okonkwo replied. Another way is that we just painted a target on our entire species. She stood and walked to the viewport, looking out at the stars that suddenly seemed much colder than before. Earth was out there somewhere, a tiny point of light in an endless darkness, and everything she had fought for, everything she had sacrificed for, was about to be tested in a way she had never imagined. Contact Hegemony Command, she said. Tell them what is coming. Tell them that humanity needs help. Do you think they will help us? Chen asked. Okonkwo thought about Admiral Vorothsel, about the respect she had seen growing in his ancient eyes. She thought about the Silurian officer who had called her people wolves. She thought about all the beings across the galaxy who had watched Therakos, and wondered if maybe they had been wrong about humans. I do not know, she admitted, but we are about to find out what this alliance really means. She turned back to face her lieutenant, and there was steel in her gaze. Either way, we are going home. Either way, we are going to fight. And either way, the Vorax are going to learn that attacking Earth was the worst mistake they ever made. Chen smiled despite the fear that both of them felt. Then let's go show them what humans are made of. Okonkwo nodded. Send the order to all human forces in the sector. We are going to war for our world. We are going to war for our people. And we are not going to stop until the last Vorax ship is burning in the void. The battle for Earth was coming, and humanity would face it together. The fleet that gathered above Earth was the largest humanity had ever assembled. And it was not enough. Every ship capable of fighting had been called home. From ancient patrol vessels to brand new warships rushed out of construction yards. Orbital defense platforms powered up weapons that had never been fired. On the surface below, billions of people looked up at the sky and waited for the storm that was coming. Commander Okonkwo stood on the bridge of the Defiant, now scarred and patched from a dozen battles, and she watched the final preparations with a heavy heart. They had 3 days before the Vorax arrived, 3 days to prepare for a battle that would determine whether humanity survived or died, Commander. Lieutenant Chen said quietly. You need to see this. She turned to the main display screen, and her breath caught in her throat. Emerging from hyperspace at the edge of the solar system were ships, hundreds of them. And they were not Vorax. They were hegemony vessels, crystalline dreadnoughts, and Silurian carriers and warships from species she had never even seen before. Admiral Vorothzel's voice came through the communication system. Calm and steady. Commander Okonkwo, the Galactic Hegemony stands with you. We have come to fight. Tears formed in Okonkwo's eyes, but she blinked them away. There was no time for tears, not yet. Admiral, she said, her voice thick with emotion. Why, we are just the auxiliary species. We are just the primitives you were trying to protect. We were wrong, Vorothzel replied. We followed doctrine for 12,000 years, and it led us to defeat. You showed us another way. You taught us that courage and passion and sacrifice are not weaknesses to be eliminated. They are the very things worth fighting for. He paused, and when he spoke again, there was something in his voice that Okonkwo had never heard before. It was respect, true and deep and hard-earned. You did not ask us to change. You simply showed us what you were willing to do for your people. Today, we follow your example. Today, we fight beside you, not as commanders, but as allies. The combined fleet took its position in orbit around Earth. Human ships mixed with alien vessels, informations that would have been unthinkable just months before. Okonkwo looked at the display showing their forces and felt something stir in her chest. It was hope, fragile and precious, and she held onto it tightly. All units. She broadcast to the entire fleet. This is Commander Okonkwo. The enemy is coming, and they are coming for our home. But we are not alone. Today, we fight as one galaxy against the darkness. The Vorax emerged from hyperspace like a plague-given form, a churning mass of bioships so vast that it dimmed the light of the sun. There were more of them than Okonkwo had ever seen, more than the intelligence reports had predicted, and for a moment, the weight of what they faced threatened to crush her spirit. And she looked at the faces of her crew, at the determination in their eyes, and she remembered why she fought. All ships, she ordered, attack. The Battle of Seoul lasted 9 days, and it was the most brutal conflict the galaxy had ever witnessed. Human pilots flew until their ships fell apart around them. Alien warriors fought beside them in boarding actions that turned corridors into rivers of blood. The line between species blurred and disappeared as beings who had once looked down on each other died together defending a world that had become a symbol for all of them. Okonkwo commanded from the front, her flagship battered and burning, but still in the fight. She made decisions by instinct rather than calculation, moving her forces in patterns that made no logical sense, but somehow always found the weak points in the enemy formation. The Vorax hive mind could not predict her, could not counter her, and for the first time, its absolute confidence began to falter. On the 5th day, Lieutenant Chen led a strike force directly into the heart of the enemy swarm. His ship was destroyed, but he and his crew survived in escape pods long enough to be picked up by a Silurian rescue vessel. When he returned to the Defiant, his first words to Okonkwo were, "Did we hurt them?" "You destroyed 3 command ships," she told him. "You disrupted their coordination for 6 hours. Yes, you hurt them." Chen smiled through his injuries. "Good. Then it was worth it." On the 7th day, the Vorax Queen ship appeared. It was the largest vessel anyone had ever seen, a living mountain of organic matter and dark energy that seemed to drink in the light around it. Wherever it moved, Vorax forces fought with renewed fury, and the Allied fleet began to buckle under the pressure. "We have to take out the Queen ship," Okonkwo said. "Everything else is just noise. If we kill the Queen, we break the swarm. Our weapons cannot penetrate its hull." Vorothzel replied over the communication channel. "We have tried. Nothing works." Okonkwo studied the display, her mind racing through possibilities. And then she saw it, a tiny flaw in the Queen ship's design, a small gap in its armor where the biosystems connected to its core. It was barely large enough to fit a shuttle, and reaching it would require flying directly into the heart of the enemy formation. "But it was there, Chen," she said slowly. "I have an idea, and you are not going to like it." Chen looked at the display and understood immediately. His face went pale, but he nodded. "A bomber loaded with our remaining antimatter warheads could fit through that gap. If it detonated inside the core, it would be enough. It would be a one-way trip. Okonkwo Seichin was silent for a long moment. Then he smiled, and it was the same smile she had seen on his face 100 times before. The smile that said he was ready to do whatever it took. "Commander, you gave us a chance to prove ourselves. You gave humanity a chance to matter. Let me return the favor." She wanted to argue, wanted to find another way. But she knew there was none. Instead, she pulled him into an embrace that said everything words could not make it count. She whispered. Chen climbed into the cockpit of a battered bomber, its hull reinforced with scavenged armor and its cargo hold packed with antimatter. He launched into the chaos of battle, weaving through Vorax fighters and defensive fire. Getting closer and closer to the Queen ship, the Allied fleet threw everything they had at the enemy, creating a corridor of destruction that Chen flew through with impossible skill. Vorax ships exploded around him, but somehow he kept going, his voice calm and steady as he reported his progress approaching target. "Hull breach in 30 seconds." Okonkwo watched on the display, unable to look away, unable to breathe. "I see the gap. Going in. Tell Earth I said hello." The bomber disappeared into the Queen ship. For 3 heartbeats, nothing happened. Then the core detonated. Light erupted from inside the Queen ship, tearing it apart from within. The explosion cascaded outward, destroying everything in its path. And all across the battlefield, Vorax ships went silent, their connection to the hive mind severed. Their purpose lost. Swarm did not retreat this time. It broke, ships scattered in every direction, lost and confused. And the Allied fleet hunted them down without mercy. When the silence came at last, Okonkwo stood on the bridge of her dying ship and looked at Earth through the viewport. It was still there, still blue and green and beautiful, still spinning in the darkness as it had for billions of years. Vorothel's voice came through the static, weak but triumphant. "We believed we could never fail. We were wrong. We believed you could never lead. We were wrong again." Okonkwo smiled, exhausted beyond measure, grief and joy warring in her heart. "We are all just people trying to survive, Admiral. Some of us are just louder about it." In the years that followed, humanity's place in the galaxy changed forever. They were no longer the auxiliary species, no longer provisional members of an alliance that looked down on them. They were equals, partners, friends. Their admirals sat on the High Council. Their tactics were taught in academies across 1,000 worlds, and their courage inspired generations of beings who had once thought emotion was a weakness. Commander Yael Okonkwo retired to a small house on the coast of West Africa, where she watched the sun set over an ocean that her ancestors had once thought was the edge of the world. Sometimes she would look up at the stars and think about all the friends she had lost, all the sacrifices that had been made, as she would feel the weight of it pressing down on her. But she also felt something else, something warm and bright that the darkness could never extinguish. It was pride, and it was hope, and it was the knowledge that humanity had earned its place among the stars. The galaxy had believed aliens could never fail. Humanity had taught them otherwise. And somewhere out there, in the endless darkness between worlds, Lieutenant Commander Marcus Chen smiled as the stars welcomed him home.